back to another episode of the Deductionist podcast, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you, kind of. It's good to hear from you, sort of. Hope you're all keeping well. So this episode today is going to be focusing on the kind of things that revolve around the forensic applications that existed within the canon of Sherlock Holmes. Was he the original progenitor of some of the ideas? Was he not? Let's get into some of that as this evening unfurls. But I got to tell you, the Monographs version 2 is doing pretty well. For those of you that don't know, this was fully funded within 12 hours, which is bananas to me. It's bananas in that particular scenario. So we are but 2 backers away from our target goal of 50. So if you haven't purchased your copy yet, now is your chance to get in quickly. If you haven't tracked down your friends and family and neighbors and dogs and local criminals to give them their copy, then you should all be doing so now. Because when we get to the 50 backer stage, everyone gets 5 free audiobooks. Like Oprah, you get 5 free audiobooks. You get 5 free audiobooks. That way around. From MX Publishing, of which the first Monographs could be one of them, right? So you're doubling up on the deliciousness that way around. Have you seen the trailer for this as well? It's awesome. Let's have a look. But it's me being biased because I made it. But I think it's awesome. How do you do a trailer for a book? In the murk of ambiguity, there's a place where truth reigns supreme, where shadows whisper to those that dare to listen, where the ordinary becomes the extraordinary. Welcome to the world of the Deductionist. Disciples of sorts of the iconic sleuth, the champions of deduction and observation. The Monographs started out as my hope to make something more than just a book. It was designed to be a tome, a textbook, a resource for all those wanting to learn how to think. That's at Undershore, so that's Arthur Conan Doyle's actual home. That's his office, where he wrote The Hound of the Baskervilles and everything else. A few riddles, a few puzzles. Those are my feet and my shoulders. That was the first one. That's back in the office. Almost 8 years ago. And it's never been out of the bestseller list in its own department since then. The Monographs 2 takes that even further. It's a training ground, a blueprint for sharpening all of your analytical prowesses. So picture this. You decoding the intricacies of human behavior. Piecing together the jigsaw puzzle of life. Imagine a student with their eyes ablaze, with epiphanies, a negotiator striding into a meeting with newfound confidence. An artist who works their tapestry of hidden meanings to yield new data, new insights, and new depths based on what they previously saw before. This could be you. Now, the Monographs 2 will guide you through... Sales pitch or what? Come on, right? Credit where it's due. Challenging and intricate puzzles, helping you decipher faces, interpret body language, reveal patterns, develop your memory. You have the potential to master all of your own observational and critical thinking in this arena. You would essentially become... That doesn't make sense. Master your own observational? That doesn't really mean anything. I meant master your own observation. In a quest for truth. Boom. How gorgeous is that front cover? Right? How gorgeous is that? I'm trying to not sound biased, but I bloody love the cover. I think it's gorgeous. It's great work. So yeah, 48 backers, 2 away, and everyone gets free stuff. And who doesn't love free? Right? Free is a bonus in this world. I was about to get on my kind of old man bandwagon then. But don't worry, I'll stay off. Now, two matters at hand. Two matters at hand, not two matters at hand. The forensic applications of detail throughout the canon, as it was known. Now, one could make the initial argument that there is far too much stuff to contain within a podcast, so we're going to be quite kind of um, speedy with the details in this arena, and it kind of depends on where it kind of depends on where your affinities lie as to whether you think he was the original progenitor of forensic science. He certainly came around at the right time to inspire a lot of experiments, to inspire a lot of analyses and approaches towards the kind of trace evidence and information that you could get from crime scenes and the like, long before CSI was even um, a fleeting thought. The Barry Allens of the world, right? So, to that end, you could look at it as trace evidence is one of the applications within the stories as well. Footprint analysis. There is a certain kind of fledgling area of forensics known as forensic podiatry as well, and it is my basic understanding, I grant you, that of the forensic areas concerning the feet that it splits off. You can be you can sort of specialize in the analysis and information connected to footprints, or you can do the podiatry aspect, which is more the feet themselves rather than the prints that they leave behind. There is still factions of forensic graphology knocking around, which is so much more than the size of loop curls and trizonal dynamics and all of this kind of thing. But we've done previous episodes on that before. Um, so now isn't the time to kind of get into that. You could also look at uh, a certain degree of ballistics analysis and indeed fingerprint identification. That was almost teetering on smut, wasn't it? So these are some of the things that popped up throughout the Sherlock Holmes canon. And when you think about it, if you look at the aspects of trace evidence, there was the Boscombe Valley mystery, where Holmes deduces that the victim was what was it? It was he deduces the struggle with the attacker based on traces of soil found under fingernails and in and around the body and things like this. A different type of soil than where the body was found. You know, right? That indication being that the struggle happened elsewhere. Now you can make the argument that that is geology and the difference there, but it would fall into the realms of trace evidence collection. And is this something that if you look at the work of Edmund Locard, who was known as the French Sherlock Holmes, who put together a lot of the original experiments when it comes to forensic science and the forensic applications of analysis of the information that you collect from scenes. Even now, Locard's exchange principle is very much followed and adhered to when it comes to breaking down certain aspects of trace evidence. You could look at the nature of fender benders and car crashes and the like to see primarily who bumped into who based on the way that they interacted and exchanged data and exchanged information. And it was in the Boscombe Valley mystery. I mean, there was a bunch of others as well, but that was the first one I found when I was researching through the cliff notes. Much to my kind of struggle, I don't know all of the stories word for word. Right, I can remember the main plot points and the stories of all of them, but when it comes to the intricacies, I would rather double check to make sure I'm right. Um, than come away with any kind of falsehoods in that area. Footprints was one that kind of caught my attention. The Hound of the Baskervilles, which now the more and more I look at the French language as well now, the Hound of the Baskerville. the Hound of the Baskerville, the Hound of the Baskervilles. What is it? Because, like, is it the plural of Baskerville, as in Henry Baskerville? Is that what we're dealing with here? I've never really asked that question. Just a thought that popped into my head at that time. There is the examination of the footprints that were left, the footprints of the gigantic hound. Right, normally used to determine weight, size, gait. Um, he's done it to ascertain in the sign of four with the prints of Jonathan Small having the stump for a leg, and certainly the indecision of women footprints as well. Bear in mind for 2 seconds while the dog goes a little mental, as Maddie's just got in from work. Um, it happens. I'm in a house, right? This is live and unfiltered and unfettered. So the dog will go mental. We have laminate flooring. So that's what you'll hear. You'll just hear the sound of like a Looney Tunes cartoon wearing high heels. That's the way I would describe the dog in that scenario. But the footprint analysis in this vein is a great way for us to develop a more purposeful and directed connection to our ability to critically think around simplistic puzzles, right? Because, and I say simplistic mostly because there's not a lot of moving parts within the puzzle itself. That's all I mean. The difficulty might still be in, where the information is, or the kind of shoe that you're familiar with. All of these other elements might spin you for a loop. But as far as the technical properties of the puzzle in this scenario, it's just a footprint in a bit of soil or grass or wherever it is, right? That's all it is in that particular way. And it makes sense for us to start to think in a way that would separate these ideals, right? If you've ever um, tried to kind of stick your parasol on the beach to make sure you're protected from the sun, how hard you press that parasol in will depend on how deep into the sand it goes, right? Now it's easier to do because we're not covering the physics of surface area dynamics and the sharpness of the points and all of this kind of thing. The way pressure works, we're not covering that. But the more weight you put behind the parasol, the deeper it will go into the sand, right? So the same must be true of any kind of surface area that is going to allow the footprint to be left behind, right? So if you think of footprints on laminate flooring, say for example, if in this hypothetical the feet were covered in something that would leave that behind, the laminate flooring is wood, so it wouldn't move anywhere. So you just get the print itself in that scenario. Whereas if you were outside on grass and it had been raining that day, the same footprint might sink a little deeper by virtue of the weight and the ground allowing it to move. So if you know a little bit more about the kind of ground that the footprint was on in relation to the possible things that could affect its kind of tensile strength, there is a rough estimation that you can use, inductive reasoning, let's call it, to gain a roundabout figure in terms of the weight of the person in question. And you would have to match that with the gait, the speed at which the footprints are moving behind, right? So if you were to walk, just walk, your footprints would be set by the length of your stride, yeah? But if you were to run, your footprints would be further apart. Otherwise, you'd be doing the little leg kind of kind of thing. Your footprints would be further apart by virtue of the speed, so there's more ground between each time that you need to put your foot down to press to keep the run going. Okay. So if it is that there are footprints close together, we know that there is a kind of a stationary walking pace. And what I've done before within testing this dynamic is got a series of kettlebells and barbells and dumbbells and this kind of thing, and kind of collected them up over a shoe to see the depth that I could match the footprint to, right? That gives you a kind of visual reference for a kind of rule of thumb almost, in the same vein that if you know how tall you are, like I'm barely 6 foot, barely. So I know whenever I see anybody from across the road or stood next to a building or, in a video or something, then I've got a good frame of reference for what 6 foot is, what that looks like. The same can be said of your familiarity with this particular concept. Was Holmes the first person to think of that? Nope. There's evidence of footprint analysis that goes back centuries, centuries, and we'll look at this kind of traditional connection to it when it comes to fingerprints, because I've done a lot of weird things with finger. That doesn't sound right. I've done a lot of um, quirky. I can't think of any other way to reference it, but that is the case, right? We'll get to that in a sec. We'll get to that in a sec, right? But that's footprints, which is an arc of forensics as well that is still found within the world and connected by this ability to think critically about the kind of observations that you make, right? One could argue that the glue that holds the whole principle of thinking like Sherlock together is control over the little voice that exists inside of your head, excluding aphantasia, your memories, as in what you remember, and your reflexes. That is the key to the kind of Sherlockian mindset in that way. Blood spatter is also very similar in the same type of reasoning, right? There needs to be. We're not going to go all Dexter uh, on the kind of approach here, but blood splatter analysis is still, it's not an exact science, right? Even if you look at the books, there is still a degree of interpretation to it. Um, and Holmes has looked at blood splatter in terms of droplets connected to moving victims and what part of the body was cut and how it would have created this particular kind of pool or movement. And blood splatter analysis is still a part of forensics. I chose to exclude it from this list, mostly because I just wanted to deal with the big boys, right? The list itself, in terms of directly kind of itemized applications, my original list went up to 33. There's not enough time to cover that all in one episode. From the comments, the application of physics is similar, but I would separate that. Though physics has a role within forensic science, I would separate that in terms of forensics and physics, so we can talk about two different things and not kind of blur the lines. We can keep it focused in the same way. The application of pressure, and specifically when it comes to looking at ballistics as well, they are direct applications of physics in that way. Just at great speeds. I mean, that was like a judo chop. I don't really know what I was doing. Um, but yeah, as I say, handwriting analysis. If you look at Scandal in Bohemia, the letter that was sent from the royal member. I'm not going to spoil the story. I was kind of umming and ahhing over the next things, but the letter that was sent from the royal member, there was a certain amount of a connection to this. Just briefly, because we have covered this in previous episodes. If you think of handwriting analysis less as personality reflections of some kind of way that a person crosses their T's or dots their I's, nah. There's about as much connection of significance to that as there is somebody folding their arms in it, meaning they are, uh, they are disagreeing with you. No, what you can think of it as is a kind of pictographic representation of what it is that you're seeing in that moment. Right? So I can give you this. Um, what kind of notes do I want to show you? Oh, there you go. I was making notes on how I am gonna build the website for Omniscience for Pipes 2 when that's ready. So when looking at this, right, that is not technically speaking how I write. My writing is not that bad. However, it is reflective of that moment because I was speed writing while listening. Right? This is the kind of connection and the way you would break down graphology in that particular way. Um, Judge me, but this book gave me the habit of smelling the papers I receive, something that's getting increasingly rarer. No judgment. In no judgment. No, have you seen my shoe effect before? I smelt the shoes of strangers. No judgment. There is a lot of work and research gone into the olfactory connection towards memory storage. So bring it on. Bring it on. As far as I'm concerned, if it's good enough for Gus and the super smeller, it is good enough for me. In come the dog. I don't, like I've got a software on in the background that kind of blocks out background noise. So I don't know how much of that you can hear. I can hear it, and it's very loud. So that's why I'm kind of cognizant of that particular detail there. So again, um, is Holmes the progenitor of handwriting analysis? No. No, you'll find in the kind of interpretations and the reworkings of graphology within certain interpretations of Sherlock Holmes, what they tend to do to kind of give it historical significance in a historical place is to cite who it was that inspired Sherlock at this particular moment. And if you look at the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlocks, much as I don't particularly like them, he references having studied graphology. So that is an idea then that can't sit with him by default through that kind of historical context. Ballistics is another one. The Silver Blaze, excuse me, Silver Blaze. um, there's lots of examinations of bullets and spent cartridges. I can't speak too much about that because I've not had recourse to study it um, for very long or in a lot of great detail. When I was in America last, I went to the range and fired a gun for the very first time. I stored the smells, I stored the sounds as much as you can because that's one of the big breakdowns from the media that they never get right about guns. They are deafening. They are deafening things. Um, so yeah, I can't speak too much about that because technically speaking, I don't know, but I know it is a big department, a big resource within the real world of forensic science and forensic analysis that this way that is connected to him. Now, here's the one: fingerprint identification. You could look at the sign of four with the thumbprint on the envelope. There's many other citations of fingerprint analysis, and it is often believed that it goes back to early 1800s of France. In the kind of connection to using fingerprints to identify an individual or identify something, some kind of trait about someone. The earliest evidence that I've found, not me personally, that I found online, the earliest evidence comes from the Qin dynasty, which, if you don't know, is from 221 to 206 BC. Dummy. I just like that it was 221 for obvious reasons. But handprints were used on legal documents as a way to signify who it was that was signing their actual name. So a name can be forged, of course. A handprint, not so much, unless you're a deeply disturbed psychopath. Right? There's no indications that they were used for individual identification in terms of this was Fred, this was Brian, this was Bob. I know no people would be called that within the Qin dynasty, but I don't know any names from back then either. It was more of an indication of the size of the person, the style of the handprint, so that comparisons could be drawn. Mentions of fingerprints within other cultures do appear, but again, not for personal identification. It wasn't until the 1850s to the 1890s that the scientific study of this first began, with 1858. So William Herschel, a British administrator in India, began requiring fingerprints on contracts. Now, it's widely considered that was the first documented use for identification. There's also, I'll try and pronounce the name, but this person is a Czech anatomist, Jan Evangelista Perkinje, Perkinje, Purkinje. I have no idea how you pronounce that. There was the classification of fingerprints into patterns around the same time, but didn't propose them for identification. It was proposed for study, in that you could spot the patterns of males and females and sizes and Westerners and Easterners and this type of thing. Sir Francis Galton was a British anthropologist, a cousin of Charles Darwin, conducted extensive studies on fingerprints in the 1880s, developing a classification system around them. And it was kind of from 1892 onwards that it really became a widely collected index that was used in policing. Now, as the stories were written around the same time, but time happened, the actual time happened first. Arthur Conan Doyle pegged them backwards. It's natural that Holmes isn't the progenitor of fingerprint analysis, but he's one of the first. I mean, it depends from enforcement area to enforcement area and what their particular protocols are. But it's one of the first things that are always looked for, depending upon the kind of trace evidence that's there. If it's indicated that a particular item or object had to have been handled to get where it is, fingerprints are brought onto the table. And the reason I spent so much time looking at them is because I am who I am. But in order for us to open doors and write things and shake hands and wave, there has to be the use of this interactive tool that's in front of us to play instruments, to eat food, right? Not that you can't do it without hands. It's just, if you look at the numbers, the people with them far outweigh the people without them. Right? So as a piece of evidence, it was something that I spent a lot of time looking at and trying to get to grips with the information around. And what you can find is that there is a different view to a fingerprint that's been hardened, calloused, than there is one without. Only immeasurably, but there is a difference there. And you can see this in the pictures, you can see this in the prints that are left behind as well. So one of the things that I took to trying after the fact was seeing if I could memorize them. I have a system for memorizing fingerprints. Is it the easiest thing in the world to do? God no. God no. There is the kind of memory competition discipline of memorizing random shapes and abstract images, and then you are tested on your recollection of them all that way round. Fingerprints are still an abstract image, of course they are, right? But because their differences, this is about to sound like a really terrible oxymoron, their differences are very similar, right? Visually, if you're trying to contain the image in your head, right? So whether you're looking at the the arches, the loops, the halls, that way around, it is a challenge to reproduce one from memory. I started doing it because I rationalized to myself, rightly or wrongly, right? I've never seen any research or anything to back this up, so this is just purely a thought that I had of the way the aspects must translate. That if I could remember the details of a fingerprint, then remembering the details and layout of a house or a room would be easier by virtue of the image itself. Remembering the specific details of a fingerprint is intricate and complicated. Remembering the layout of a room where a couple of doors are and a few objects that are on the table has to have been easier by default. Now, as I say, that could just be a rationalization of me going out of my way to make the memorization of a room easier by making the memorization of a fingerprint harder, right? That may just work for me and how I think about it, a belief that I created for myself in order to shatter. Who knows? It worked. Right? It worked. That's all I'm saying. And that kind of spiraled my connection towards being able to spatially, as in through the old neocortex, spatially being able to reproduce the things that I've seen, right? Which is getting a little bit more challenging now. My eyes are getting tired, and I have my stigmatism because I spend so much time in front of a bloody screen, which will often mean I'm trying to reproduce blurry things. But who doesn't love a challenge in that way? There was that autistic fella. What was his name? Let me find it. It's in there somewhere. Stephen Wiltshire. Stephen Wiltshire, who could, take a helicopter tour over Rome and reproduce it all on these gigantic sheets of paper. But he would be reproducing the exact number of windows that were in a building, the exact crumbling on the side of a wall, how many streets over something was, and the cars that he'd seen at the times, and the shops and the windows. And I don't know too much about the fella to know if it's a skill that he acquired or it's something that came as a result of his savantism. I would presume the savantism is responsible for that, but I don't know. Um, but the way I looked at that is that as a skill to be able to remember that much detail would be phenomenally useful. Phenomenally useful, right? Am I anywhere close to that kind of detail? God, no. But when it comes to being able to take down, the details of a building from a few seconds of a glance, or the objects in a room from a few minutes with them, yeah, yeah. I did this on the first series of the Deductionist. There is I think I've got a deck cards to hand. Yeah, the old Penn and Tellers. There is a kind of card effect that's done with memory work this way, where you would have somebody think of a playing card whilst you're remembering the order of the pack. They would then go through and take out whichever one they were thinking of, so that when you went through it again, it would be missing. You'd recognize it as the one thing that wasn't there within the order. Uh, oh, that was fun. That was a fun little accident. I just shuffled naturally and accidentally flipped one, and it looked like the card did a front flip mid waterfall. That was fun. Anyway, so what I did was, it was last time I was in Ireland. Is I was with Liam, and we'd found this guy who didn't mind me coming to his house, and just doing some stuff there. So I asked him to think of an object from his house, from his whole house. From upstairs, downstairs. So he's got bookshelves, clothes, shoes, cutlery, plates, food, and anything like that. And then I would wander around and do my best to memorize the items in the house. And there wasn't very long. There was like between 3 to 5 minutes. We did it a couple of times. And then I would go out the house and I would ask him to pocket the object, or hide it, so that when I went round, it would be the one thing that was missing. This all started from fingerprints, right? This all started from fingerprints, and it was a weird connection to have, in that one thing sparks another, sparks another, sparks another, sparks another, sparks another idea, and that is kind of, in a weird way, the primary reason for this episode. In that, some people laud Sherlock as the owner of this idea, and the main person for this idea, and the main person for this idea. My particular position on that is, who cares? Right? Sherlock was the first person that I saw a lot of these ideas in, but it leads to more, it leads to more, it leads to more, it leads to more. Who'd have thought that for a guy that doesn't carry around, the kind of forensics lab, that the visible structure of a fingerprint could inspire a memory technique that would allow the detail of a room to be ingested within a few minutes, relative to the room and how much detail is in there as well, obviously. But this is the nature of what we are concerning ourselves here, and why forensics is an ever expanding, ever changing and altering field, much like medicine and a lot of other related sciences. In that way, there is always more to learn, always more to see. Just seeing Craig's here. Good evening, sir. um Good evening, but we are wrapping up now. um there's always more to see, more to learn, more to know. That's one of the main forensic truths about Sherlock, is that the modus operandi to get him to the kind of conclusions that he was drawing were means to an end, right? It's just as beneficial for him to analyze things in a chemistry experiment as it is to call upon bits of information that he's got stored away in that memory palace of his, right? So I hope you've been able to take away some forensic-based information about ye old Sherlock Holmes this evening. I actually, I really enjoy looking at forensics. It reminds me of my forensic psychology degree, and just the awful things that we had to look at over the years doing that. But there we are. Right, guys, as we wrap it up, I want to make mention that if you're not following Anthony Metivier on his YouTube channel and his podcast, The Magnetic Memory Method, you're missing out. I did another interview with him the other morning, and by virtue of where he is in the world, I had to get up at 4 a.m. and go straight into talking about deep scientific things. We actually got into a debate about, not like a heated debate, but more of a philosophical, theological discussion around free will, and the reality of it, and whether it is a thing and whether it's not a thing. And there was a lot of fun things that we spoke about. We spoke about accents and the nature of memory, and the nature of connecting detail towards memory, and it was genuinely better than any cup of coffee I could have had in the morning. Genuinely, it was a real cracking discussion, and it's my understanding that will be coming out soon on his channel. I did an interview with him a while back, and he's obviously been on mine as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But until then, I'm going to love you and leave you. And with that in mind, folks, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!